So, good morning from under the trees, because apparently the weather's decided to join this conversation.
Yes, and I think the voice in your head was right, wasn't it, this morning?
It wasn't it. I had this little sense you are going to be dumped on and you need a bit of cover. And now we're here, standing under the trees with microphones that took far too long to set up.
The moment we press record, it begins. But anyway.
But we're going to continue anyway, because I really felt I needed to press record on this one. I never quite know whether to press record or not. But this morning I felt that something significant was being shown.
So this starts with you yesterday, doesn't it, by the lake?
Yeah, that's probably the best place to start. So we've had this heat wave and then suddenly the rain came in, like proper rain, torrential rain. And there's something energising about rain, isn't there?
Yeah, it does change the atmosphere. It feels like a transition, doesn't it? It makes everything feel alive again, especially after a heat wave like we've experienced.
I think this speaks of a transition we're in, something I'm noticing, and I just wanted to speak it out. So I was walking around the lake and it had been raining all night. I started seeing these tiny frogs, these baby frogs. They were coming out of the lake onto the path. They were everywhere. And there were a couple of men walking their dogs, and one of the dogs was going absolutely nuts trying to catch these baby frogs. And one of them exclaimed, "It's a plague of frogs." And the moment he said that, something in me went, I was meant to hear that, because things had been happening in my life the day before, and that comment suddenly gave them a frame. It kind of drew me straight back to the plagues of Egypt. So just to frame things a little bit, we're just going to go off on a little rabbit trail of studies we've done on the plagues of Egypt and some other things. This is important to fill you in on some of the conversation we had before we started recording. So the plagues, they come in triads. And if you follow that structure, it becomes really interesting. So you take the first triad, the Nile turns to blood, then the frogs come, then the lice. The frogs are the second stage. It's like the liminal space between the first and the third in that triad. And so the Nile's turned to blood, but the Nile is still in a sense outside your house by the riverbanks, and Egypt was pretty massive, so it could have been half an hour walk or so before you get to see the Nile. It's not visceral in your immediate environment. But then come the frogs, and suddenly the plague isn't just in the river, it's in your town, it's in your house, it's in your cooking appliances, it's entered your domestic space.
Yeah, so the first plague is visible, but somewhat external. The second, it's crossed a boundary.
Yeah, exactly. But then you get the third in the triad, you get the lice, and the lice are on you. You cannot close a door on them. That is the end of the first triad. And I'm going to call it a superlative end.
There's that word again, yes.
Yes, superlative, our new word. It means the extreme end. It means the fullest expression of a thing. So the lice are the superlative end of the first triad of the plagues, from the river to the lice. That is when the Egyptian magicians, who'd been able to imitate the waters turn into blood, they'd been able to produce frogs. They can't produce the lice. They can't magic this one up. And this is the moment they say, this is the finger of God.
Which connects to that trajectory study we did on the finger of God, doesn't it?
Exactly. So the next time you see that phrase in that kind of way, you're up Mount Sinai. And Moses is there, and God is writing the tablets with the finger of God, it says in the Hebrew in the text. And when we follow that phrase through Scripture, it's quite interesting. We began to see this pattern. When things are unwinding down below, God is writing something above. That's the pattern we were seeing. So in Egypt, the finger of God appears at the point where Egypt's normality is being undone. That's the pattern. And then we carried that idea. Let's just give one example. We looked at Daniel, where actually the finger very visibly turns up writing on the wall. Again, it's a moment where a kingdom is being viscerally shown that it is going to come down. And at that moment, they're celebrating. And an interesting thing, they are using the vessels from the sanctuary, but they're using them in this vile, defiling way. They're drinking from what was holy and praising the gods of gold, praising the gods of silver. But at that same moment, exactly the same moment, the underneath of the city, it's really freaky actually, when the writing is appearing above in this kind of celebrative, kind of quite defiling, drunken party. The kingdom is already collapsing underneath them.
Wow, the armies are coming in underneath you.
And isn't that often true? This is something that we were talking about this morning before this, that when a society, when a kingdom or a system starts breaking down, it seems to reach this kind of vile intersection where almost something sacred is used for defilement, if you can see the pattern there.
We could go off on that one, but we'll come back to your story at the lake.
Yes, okay. When I was thinking about the plague of frogs and then what comes next, the plague of lice, I was reminded of the two sides. On one side, it's revealing destruction, it's causing destruction, it's the finger of God that is not being experienced in a very nice way. And it's making a hidden reality impossible to ignore. It's writing in the sand, and we did do the trajectory all the way to Yeshua writing in the sand with the woman caught in adultery, and we looked at that finger writing in the sand, and we were realizing he was writing in the sand the reality of the Pharisees and the Sadducees standing there. This was a corrupt system that was coming down, very visceral in the cruelty that they were showing to this woman. It really highlighted and made very visceral how corrupt the leadership had become, that they would take a vulnerable woman and frame her in order to not only kill her, there's complications there because Rome wouldn't have allowed that, but that's another story, but also to really bring down Yeshua and his ministry. And that's why I think we see the finger of God writing in the dust at that moment. But on the other side, the same finger is writing a new covenant. There's a bookend in this passage with the third plague and the finger of God. The next time we see the finger of God is up a mountain writing covenant above while the people are below there.
So let me just get this clear. I just need to find a seat. Just needs to sit down for a sec. So let's just reiterate that. So there we've got these newly freed slaves, and they're at the foot of the mountain, and they're about to receive a covenant. And this is like the opposite end of what we see when they were in Egypt in the narrow place, and the finger of God was exposing the collapse of Egypt, the very visceral end of that narrow place. That's the last time we see the finger of God. And I just find the striking polarity of that quite profound, to be honest. This is where they've come from. Do you ever do in your life a little rewind? I think you did it on the 1st of June.
Yeah, that was yesterday, funny enough. Like a rewind back to see where you were last year, maybe 10 years ago. And yeah, I always say that you can only really clearly see the hand of God, the movement of God really in your life when you look back. But you can't see it in the mess and the chaos of what's going on at the moment, but you can look back and say, wow, that was painful, but look where I am now. Look what I've learned about God. Look how my relationship has grown with him and with others and with myself through those situations. So, yeah, sorry, I went off on one. What were you saying?
I don't know, but that's pretty good.
Okay, that's fine.
No, I was saying these newly free slaves at the foot of this mountain. Rewind all the way back to where they were in the midst of horrible situations where they were experiencing the lice, and maybe in the midst of that, they wouldn't have the ability to perceive the up the mountain finger of God writing a covenant with them. They wouldn't have been able to connect a covenant with the God of their fathers with the situation they were facing at that time.
It's almost like the plagues remind me of the way they saw the manna in the wilderness after a year of eating that. They become troubled by it, and they were seeing the temporary as something permanent. They were hoodwinked, as it were, by their current reality and weren't able to see beyond the box of that. And I think that speaks into a slave mindset. A slave mindset is a restricted view as well as a restricted being. And maybe sometimes a restricted being is because we are in a restricted view. And I think that's a challenge for us. We've also got to be aware in those moments when we think we've reached the destination, we think we've reached a really good place, Mount Sinai, but in fact, it might even be just the beginning of the story, and there's a lot more coming.
I know, it's just what's coming to mind to me is when we experience these moments, we need to remember that there is a lot more to it than we realise. But also that we talked about the idea of an outside of time backdrop to it.
Yes, an outside of time program, or what's the word?
Schedule.
Yes, that's it. An outside of time based schedule. Usually in a schedule you get 9 o'clock we do this, 10 o'clock we do this, midday's lunch and all this. It's like time based, but it's really weird to think of a schedule outside of time.
Yeah, and maybe that's actually helpful. We're so bound by deadlines, actually. Interesting, the word dead in there. And maybe we need to give ourselves a break here.
Wow, I love that. So we think God is working to a schedule based in time because that's how we experience everything. But perhaps time happens within his schedule.
Wow. Can you say that again?
Perhaps, can I? I don't know. Perhaps time is beholden to his schedule. I hope I said that similar.
That's even better, actually. Time is beholden to God's schedule rather than the schedule beholden to time. I love that. So rather than his schedule being governed by time. Love it.
Yeah, it's a very different way to think about it when it comes to God's work in our lives. Covenantal work. It takes the pressure off something, doesn't it, when we take the time, the deadline out of it. Anyway, let's come back to the frogs. And walking around the lake. Yesterday, hearing this guy saying, goodness me, it's a plague of frogs here. Something that was out there has become close. And personally, I have this sense over the last few weeks, maybe even a month, this sense of freedom. And I personally have moved on from a lot of things that I have struggled with in my life. But I also realise I'm still like Egypt in some ways. And on the 1st of June, I'd like to get up early and watch the sunrise. Checking where I am in life.
And then that afternoon.
Yeah, that afternoon something internal with me happened and I just thought, oh no. And I do hope it was just a glitch. And I did come back from it, but it was very unpleasant. It affected me like I had some really crazy, horrible dreams as well, really sort your life out type dreams that, when you wake up from a dream and it really, you carry it with you. The ghost of that dream is still haunting you all day. And then I received a text message from someone. It came out of the blue, absolutely out of the blue. This person had been in quite a bad place over the previous few days. I tried to give what I could of some comfort, some words, something saying, I don't know how you cope. I really, really honour how you seem to handle stuff. You're an incredible person. And I couldn't give more than that, but I tried as much as I could. I'd been unwell as well, actually. I'd had a DNV virus.
DNV virus sounds a little bit like the Duke of Edinburgh virus. No, that's something else, isn't it?
Wow, that's really jarred my brain.
Sorry.
Where was I? The text message. So anyway, I felt this person needed more, and I felt bad about that. But I had also sensed that I needed to step back, and I didn't know why. I didn't know what was fully going on. Just keep a bit of healthy distance.
Yeah, you sensed a boundary.
That's exactly it. And then this text came. Basically said they had a romantic interest in me. And to be honest, as a single person, single man in my mid-40s, especially when there are single women out there in their 40s as well, it makes sense. And this is just normal life, isn't it, And I really like this person as a friend. I really, really value them. But I do not have a reciprocal feeling.
Difficult, isn't it? That is an awkward but very real life situation.
Yeah, but the strange thing was that there's also this sense of immense freedom. Now that sounds really odd, but I think the freedom came because something unknown had become known. And the thing I sensed under the surface this thing has now surfaced. It just made me think how many things are unspoken, unsaid, but still felt. As I was standing under a tree, because it was pouring of rain by then, just looking at the water of the lake, I saw these drops falling, and the bigger drops made these big ripples, and those ripples spread outwards, and they interacted with other ripples that were made from other drops, and they crossed into each other. Like, you could see the intersection of those ripples. I was like, that's what happens in community. So there are these movements, there are interactions that are not fully conscious, they're not fully spoken, but they are rippling across the surface in a deeper level of our experience of community, or friendships, or interactions with people, even in the office, of people you don't even know that well.
And that connects to the frogs again, doesn't it? Because, I don't know, I just see that the still water is becoming active in an intentional way. It's not just a wave. It's actually caused by a drop in the water, something specific.
Yes, but that's an interesting one. Something that you experience that causes a movement through you, and maybe causes a movement through the community. Interesting. Anyway, so here I am, watching the water, watching movement, watching the ripples interacting, and then I think about community. Oh, so do you want to follow on with...
Sorry, yeah, no, I didn't want to stop you, but just thinking that it's like the frogs, the water, the plague in the water then comes onto the path with the plague of frogs. And I was just thinking the ripples are like something seen from this hidden drop. Like it's making it noticeable.
Yeah, I can see where you're going. Yeah, something visceral coming out of the moving water. Yeah, almost like, I suppose, a bullseye. You can reverse engineer that ripple and find out roughly where the drop was. And without a ripple, you wouldn't ever know. You'd hear the plop, and then you'd look. And if we didn't have the physical reality of ripples, we would never be able to discern where the plop was. And especially if you drop something in the water, that's quite useful to see where the ripple is, isn't it?
Yeah, they're really good. It's like a homing device for you.
You can go quite deep with that, can't you?
Yeah. Anyway, I didn't want to
Okay.
take you off. Carry on.
So yeah, that was my thought about community, and there are ripples underneath the surface. And I did ask God, I said, look, I think there's something deeper here. So I did pray at that moment. I said, I'm going to do a bit of research into this, because I feel you're trying to speak through this. And what I uncovered in that research is going to be the basis of the next 3 conversations. And we're going to look at these dynamics through the lens of psychology, physics, and mysticism as well. And then we're going to get practical with something I found and pick up again, realizing it was relevant, but we'll get to that. But I just want to continue relaying the geography of where I was when I was having these thoughts at the lake, because I think it's going to help us triangulate a moment that life is bringing us for learning. Because I think life wants us to move on. Ripples are forming. Frogs are coming out of the river. And yeah, fundamentally, I think it's something that happens within us individually. But I think we need to realize that this wants to happen among us. Mature community is going to be like a safe haven. When the environment around us that is actually Egypt, that is described in the Bible as Babylon, starts coming down around us. And we're working on a series of conversations that are going to reveal a river of blood that we have been ignoring. And we believe God wants to break humanity free. But God works aligned with a pattern always. And we want to reveal where frogs are already coming out of the river in this massive turning point in human history. But I want to move on now to the weekly Torah portion, because that is part of the geography in time that is going to speak into the backdrop of the next few conversations that we're going to have. And we are in Shelach this week. It's the beginning of June 2026, and that's what we're reading at the moment in the Torah cycle. I always find the Torah portion lines up with what's going on in life weirdly. This is where the spies go into the land. Numbers 13 is where they're in the wilderness and they're sent to tour the land, not really spy the land. And this phrase at the beginning of this Torah portion in Numbers 13, God said to Moses, send for yourself. Shelach lecha. It can be understood as send for yourself, but also in a way send to yourself. So the prefix lamed can have that sense of either for or to. So send for yourself, but you can interpret it as send to yourself. They're going to discover something about the land, yes, but more importantly, they're going to discover something about themselves.
Yeah, so the touring of the land becomes a mirror.
Exactly. So Moses gives them a criteria. They're supposed to look at the people of the land. I can't remember it all. The people of the land, the cities, the fruit, the strength of the land. Is it walled cities? Is it? And they go in with this lens. They bring back the fruits. Yes, it's huge. Evidence that the land is really, really good. But the reality is too much for them to bear. Because isn't that the state of our promised land often? I love my friend's song, Sally Cranham, giants and figs. Sometimes the figs come with giants. There's a phrase right in the depths of their report that really kind of uncovers something very important. We saw ourselves as grasshoppers, and so we were in their eyes. And I know people often say, well, that wasn't true, they only thought the giants saw them that way. But actually, I saw this as a truth. We project how we see ourselves. The way we see ourselves is almost a lens that we allow life to happen through us. So if I see myself as a grasshopper, then I'm going to move like a grasshopper. I'm going to speak like a grasshopper. I'm going to decide like a grasshopper. And the world is going to respond to me as a grasshopper through that restricted identity. It's just a thing. It's just a thing I've noticed in my life, and I think it's a thing.
So when they say we were grasshoppers in our own eyes and in our own eyes, and so we were in theirs, they're actually revealing a lens they've got installed still. And maybe is it the slave identity that's still very much alive in them?
Yes, exactly. And that's kind of where I was going, is that this is why this moment needed to happen. God allowed this sending because Israel needed to see the lens that they were stuck in. And they needed to see that. And it's this phrase, it's easier to get Israel out of Egypt, but more difficult, maybe impossible, to get Egypt out of the people. And Egypt was still very much alive in them psychologically and spiritually, because you can't really separate psychological from spiritual. It's all in there. And our psychological barriers can prevent the spiritual flow. Spirit is just, let's demystify that. It's just ruach, it's wind, it's life, it's breath. That's all that we mean by spirit. That's all that the Bible, I believe, means. Just as the movement of emotions are, so the movement of the wind in us is the spirit side of us. And our emotions can block what the spirit wants to do, what the life wants to breathe in and breathe out of us with. The unrestricted life of God is so often blocked by our emotions that often our movement from the lens that we have installed to allow life to happen through us with. It's just an interesting thought.
Okay, that's really interesting, linking the idea of spirit, the movement of wind, the movement of breath in and out, unrestricted life with the movement of emotion within us as well. Yeah,
But they were still disabled by a slave identity, and that is dangerous. If you cannot see yourself as someone who can inhabit the promise, then the promise itself becomes terrifying. The fruit is there, yeah. The land is good, yes. But the self-image cannot survive the sight of the giants. And that's really profound.
Wow, it's really close to imposter syndrome.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before. So much potential is locked up in an imposter syndrome pandemic, maybe. I experience it a lot within myself. How we see ourselves restricts us. It really does. And if I carry an inner lens of restriction, then even opportunity feels like a threat.
That's tragic, isn't it?
Yeah. And think of it in terms of tragedy to you, but widen that. If God has put something in you and it's being stopped by imposter syndrome, who is it that you're causing restriction to? Yes, yourself, but also the purposes of God that wants to flow through you. I'm thinking of many stories now in the Bible, Esther being one of them. If you need to stand up in this moment. I'm thinking of Moses, actually, a great example. No, I can't speak. Oh, I think he had great imposter syndrome, really massive. But he was the man for the job, and just visualize him, the responsibility he had. Imposter syndrome's a big problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, the promised land can end up feeling like a threat. And in that way, it's really useful that the spies were sent to themselves. And when I say themselves, for yourself in the Hebrew, it's one singular thing. And I think it really represents the singular identity of Israel. The spies were the ones who uncovered the true identity of Israel, the true self-identity of Israel. Actually, they spied out the giant within Israel.
Yeah. The real giant was actually the grasshopper they saw themselves as. And this moment was all about uncovering their self-identity. And as you said before, I think it has something to do with the slave mindset, that restricted view. And we've talked about the difficulty of getting Egypt out of the people, but working within pattern. God allows these very sacred moments to bring the river to you, the frogs, the lice, and let go of a restrictive reality that you weren't aware of, or maybe you were ignoring. So I just want to recap where we've been so far. Several things converging. We had the frogs at the lake, the plagues, the finger of God, the ripples of community, that text from that person, your friend, the spies seeing themselves as grasshoppers.
Yeah, and it's not an accident that at this moment all these things are coming together. And also I just wanted to add, I had a booked in counselling session in the afternoon that day, and it was brutal, and it floored me. It completely wiped me out. There's kind of moments when stuff gets dug up from underneath. So again, this kind of idea of a plague being out there, not really relevant, became very much like a frog on my path. It's no longer in a river down the road that I don't have to go and see. Really interesting day yesterday. But we were also, it's really weird how the intersection happens, because over the last couple of days we've decided that we are researching for another conversation we want to record about the financial system and the wider system, and for revealing a stench. It will open your eyes to where we are at the moment. There is a pattern of corporate extraction happening, almost corporate extortion, and it turns development and progress, it stifles it, and it's actually getting in the way. It's actually completely locking the door on movement of true progression, turning things that should serve people into mechanisms to drain people.
And what struck you is that it's not just out there anymore, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's it. I think that's how we started having that conversation. At first you can think, well, the Nile is blood, yeah, as we said, it's down the road. It's in the system somewhere, it's in the government, it's corporations, it's terrible, it's global finance, it's out there. But then the frogs come into your house and suddenly you realise, this is affecting my everyday life. It spreads into education, medicine, housing, food. The frogs are in the ovens, and they're in the place where we make bread. And I think, just to another frog analogy, it's boil a frog in the water. It's not actually the case. I've looked into this. You put a frog in the water and you slowly increase the heat. The frog doesn't notice and he boils alive. That's an illustration, that's a metaphor. But that's what's happening. The metaphor of the frog in the water, it's been happening for a while. And when we uncover for you what's going on in the world, you'll be surprised to see what we've been coping with. It's frogs on your path. And we are going to transition into a moment where it's going to turn into lice.
Yep, exactly.
The dark patterns that we see on web browsers, on subscription, the front end of subscriptions, the tiny little login button, and in the middle of the screen you got the join button, and older people can press that button and accidentally sign up for a second contract. Like, you'd think it's bad design, but it's bad design on purpose, and it's evil. I think it's evil.
In a way, it makes sense for the growth model.
Yeah, and this is the sinister, almost saddening reality of it, is that so even my pension fund is linked to that dark pattern on a website where the login button is small, and then my poor dad ends up paying for 2 accounts rather than 1. It's really, really twisted, really dark, really difficult to absorb, to be honest.
Yeah, wow. So development and progress are slowed, blocked, repackaged as a subscription dependency.
Adobe is one of the culprits. I want to say corporations. Corporates, that's an interesting new coined phrase. Thank you very much.
Very clever. Corporates. Anyway, there we go.
When the frogs come out, as we were speaking earlier, it feels evasive, but it also means the thing that is hidden is now at last becoming visible. And something visible, hey, you can respond to it with truth, and truth sets you free.
And that's what was happening with Egypt, isn't it? These plagues were revealing the truth of their existence, weren't they? And that was leading to their release from Egypt. So just as I suppose the spies were sent in to explore really themselves, maybe the plagues were there to explore for them. The plague is also a revelation.
Yes, exactly. Never think these things are terrible in your life. I mean, they are terrible, but really, come on, let's reframe it. Let's stop fighting the enemy round every corner, and let's seek for the revelation that moment might be giving you. It reveals the condition of Egypt. It reveals restriction in your life. It reveals a narrowness, the unsustainability of systems, of situations. And then when the lice came, the magicians finally say, this is the finger of God. They recognize that this is not merely about another trick within the system. This is something beyond the system, exposing the system.
Oh, wow, yeah. And the same finger, remember, as we said before, is the finger that writes the covenant. The same finger that exposes the system and the collapse that the finger is producing is also writing the covenant.
Yeah, and that is hope. Because if we see collapse, we see despair, and don't see that God is also writing covenant with that same finger, while the kingdoms unwind, then we can stand differently within that moment. We can say, yes, the frogs are in the house. Yes, the ripples are moving, Yes, the grasshopper identity is being exposed. Yes, we're going to have to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Because of that identity that's been revealed within us. The systems are showing their parasitic nature, but God is not panicking. He is outside of time. His schedule is not governed by our deadlines. And perhaps the exposure itself is mercy.
And that's the attributes, isn't it, of God?
That's what Moses reminds God of when God was going to wipe out Israel. And Moses says, hang on a minute, God. We've been on the mountain together and you've shown me your attributes. And they're all mercy, to be honest. So what's this about? Why are you wiping these people out? And that moment, look, don't frame it as God being angry and wanting to wipe out like some kind of deranged person. This was a test for Moses. Look, God is so wise in what he does. This was a test for Moses at that moment. His intercessory calling is being tested here, and he passes the test.
Wow. And that's so... When we read stuff like that in the Bible, it's so easy to misinterpret, isn't it, what is actually going on through our lenses. But just like the Garden of Eden story, I was just reflecting on what you're saying there, and it reminds me of the Garden of Eden story. It's how on earth could God do that to Adam and Eve to allow a tree to be there and the snake to be there. And that was their first test, though. That was needed for them and causing death and all that. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, my brain just went to our conversation to do with the archery idea.
Oh, yeah, goodness me, that's an amazing conversation, but we will not go there now. But don't misinterpret what you're reading in the Bible. Just take the truth of the attributes of God, the 13 attributes that we see when Moses goes up to receive the second version of the covenant after the sin of the golden calf. Mercy. I haven't got them to hand, but read them for yourself. Exodus 34. Just Google the 13 attributes of God. They are grounded in mercy. And the idea of mercy is chesed. Chesed is a term that is on the nurturing side of God. He brings you into a womb with that. He wants you to grow within that. And sometimes a womb can look like discipline, and discipline can be misinterpreted, But we've gone off again.
Yeah, no, it's cool though. I think we've given up on trying to keep to time here.
Yeah, people tune in and tune out, whatever. Where were we? The idea of exposure being mercy.
Yeah, because you can't be freed from what remains hidden. As we said, truth is what sets you free, and if something isn't in the light, there's no truth. It's all conjecture.
Conjecture cannot set you free. Probably it even binds you up further. And that's maybe what the environment of conspiracy and conjecture can do to us. We just need to remember that. And then we have to ask the question, what is truth? And that's where we could really go off.
Yeah, let's not go off there. So yeah, freed from what remains hidden because it's truth now. How do we respond?
I think we respond by firstly not panicking, but also not pretending. We do not panic because God is writing covenant, but we don't pretend because the frogs are real. Something under the surface that's real. I remember being so here we go, another side alley, but it's very important to bring this up. At a very pivotal time in a community years and years ago, I was at the pastor's house and we were having a meal together. And then suddenly the ants turned out from underneath his carpet. He didn't know that he had an ant's nest under there. And the whole carpet was moving with ants. It was horrific. And then shortly after that, there was a massive collapse. There's a massive scandal revealed. We need to acknowledge that we're pretending. And if we can't acknowledge that, God will send something to help us stop pretending. And in community, we need to become more attentive to the ripples, being sensitive, and being willing to ask, hang on a minute, what's moving here? What's being felt but not said?
In terms of the wider system?
Yes. We need to notice that when the river has turned, when the frogs are in the ovens, we need to ask where creativity, provision, medicine, technology and ordinary life are being captured by the extraction we're going to be talking about. But again, not with panic. Panic belongs to Egypt, but discernment belongs to covenant.
Wow, that's a really good distinction. Love that.
Because panic says everything is collapsing and there's no way through this. Discernment says something is being exposed and God is inviting us to see this clearly. And that's where the spies come back in. And the question was not whether the giants were real. The giants were real and they were big. The question was, who are we in relation to the promise? Are we grasshoppers or are we covenant people?
And that question doesn't disappear, does it?
No, it comes back again and again. And every time we face something bigger than us, the grasshopper question appears, doesn't it? Who am I? Who are we? And we need to ask ourselves those questions. Who are we? Who am I? Am I still a slave? Am I still acting in restriction here? Are we still living inside the narrow place, even though God has brought us out? Open your eyes to where you are. Liminal space, that's where you are. Difficult place to be. In between rooms, the corridor. That's why we have rituals like bar mitzvah, teenage years coming on. You need to do something about that psychologically. Marriage, from single to married. these liminal spaces are really dangerous places. And often actually, by the way, those rituals in other cultures involve very difficult things that you have to walk through. Initiation. I think there's some wisdom in that. I think we've lost a lot of that in our soft, comfortable world. And maybe this is what God is doing in the wilderness. This is their liminal space, very difficult circumstances. And that's why I felt it was worth pressing record here, because it feels like we are entering into a frog stage, that things that were out there are coming closer. Emotional undercurrents are beginning to become conversations. And in the world which we will expose, systematic corruption is entering daily life. And inner identities are actually being revealed by the scale of the promise in front of us. And it's messy. It's messy.
But not hopeless.
Not hopeless at all, exactly. Because the same God who exposes Egypt writes covenant. As we said before, the same finger that brings the magicians to the end of their power is the same finger that writes tablets on the mountain and empowers a nation. Maybe that's what we need to hold. When the frogs come, your story is moving. The hidden thing is surfacing. In terms of the movements of the tabernacle in the wilderness, the cloud is lifting. You're going to have to do something about your dwelling. Pull those tent pegs up. Things are being interrupted. Maybe a false normal is being challenged. And yes, the next stage, the lice. And it's harder than the frogs. And that's the superlative end of the Triad that we talked about at the beginning. But even there, when it becomes almost excruciatingly visceral, this is when we start seeing the finger of God. This is where people start noticing that there's another kingdom at work here. I'm actually looking forward to that moment. I don't think we're there yet.
Well, just look at the pattern of Egypt. But when the finger of God is revealed in such a powerful way, the magicians of Egypt, maybe let's call them the financiers of the corporate greed, see for themselves those things who have been conjuring up the magic, money coming out of nowhere.
Maybe there's another stage coming that we all are not looking forward to. But also it's a place where we can see God the most clear, and it becomes blindingly obvious. We need to see what's surfacing and lift our eyes. I love that phrase, I lift my eyes up to the mountains, where does my help come from? It's speaking of the enemies that can come over the mountains, but let's lift our eyes higher to a higher mountain. Let's look at Mount Sinai right now, of a covenant being written up on a mountain that's higher than the situation you find yourself in.
And that feels like the centre of it, really, to be honest.
To lift our eyes up to that mountain, that's where the true centre is, isn't it? The system is being exposed, but God is writing. And that's where I want to get my strength to stand in covenant discernment.